Hi, welcome to the session about the secret of marking Wordy papers. My name is Iryna McDonald, and I'm going to be your presenter for today. In this session, there are three things that we want to find out about. Firstly, what is the examiner looking for in your script, and therefore what we need to provide to get through this exam with excellent marks. But sometimes Wordy papers prove to be a bit trickier than students initially anticipate. So we also need to appreciate what makes those Wordy papers difficult. Why do students struggle? And finally, we of course want to achieve exam success. So there will be some hints and tips for you to help you get through your exam. Let's start at the very beginning and think about what examiner is after. And most important thing to know is that examiner and the markers are on your side. They want to make sure that every point they see in your script scores marks. So as long as you give them the opportunity to give those marks, you are going to be through this exam in no time at all. But to score those marks, your points have to be applied. As in, you are often given scenario, a context of the organization in which the question is set. So only if your points are relevant to scenario circumstances, then marks could be gained. And of course, the marker is expecting you to add value in your answer. Not just repeat the information you've seen in the scenario, but you need to explain how your answer actually aids to the understanding how your answer helps to solve the problems organization is experiencing. I know this sounds easier said than done, so let's have a look at the challenges. What might make this exam difficult? What are the things we need to be mindful of when attempting Wordy exams? The reasons why students often struggle in the Wordy exam is primarily because question is not fully understood. And I know the exams are time pressured and you want to write as much as possible in the time available, but it might be worthwhile pausing for a second, taking a step back and thinking about what am I actually asked to do? What are those question requirements all about? Because if you understand the question requirements, that holds the key to unlocking the exam to scoring high marks. You also need to think about scenario analysis. Scanning very briefly through a scenario means important facts could be overlooked, and it will be much more difficult for you to put your answer in the context that the examiner expects. Make sure your points are fully explained. If you are just providing outline 3-4 words, hoping that that will give you marks, unfortunately, the examiner is going to be disappointed. They cannot assume that you meant a certain thing. It has to be very clear on paper what it is that you are trying to communicate. So make an effort to make sure your points are fully understood. You also need to think commercially when attempting an exam. Would what you are suggesting work in that organization, in that industry, in that environment? Because if the point doesn't have commercial validity, then the mark is forgone. And finally, of course, it is time. The usual problem in the exam is that students give it all when it comes to the first requirement or the first question, and they write tons and tons, but then as they approach the end of the exam, they realize, oh my God, the time has run out. And that means you are not able to give the due amount of attention to the final question. You reduce the amount of marks available to you overall in this exam paper. So how are we gonna overcome those difficulties? Let's focus on the exam technique that is key to any Wordy paper that you are about to attempt. As I keep emphasizing, do spend that minute on reading the question requirements carefully and think about key verbs. For example, a question could ask you to explain the benefits of a particular strategy, And by explaining the benefits, you just have to say what's good about those strategies. But if the question is asking you to evaluate the strategy, evaluation implies that both perspectives are necessary. What is good, what is bad about strategy being suggested, and sometimes you even need to provide the conclusion, the overall summary of your view on that strategic move. There could be specific points in requirements that must be addressed in order for you to gain good marks. For example, the strategy might need to be implemented using technology. So unless your answer makes reference to specific technologies necessary to support the strategy, marks will not be gained. Once we've read the question requirements and we know exactly what it is that we're asked to do, then we're ready to progress and think about scenario. It is essential that we read and plan at the same time. As was said, time in the exam is very limited, so using every minute wisely is helping us succeed. When we read the scenario, we straight away think about question requirements. Is it requirement 1A? Is it requirement 1B? Or any other requirement that this scenario fact relates to? It is highly unlikely that the examiner will give you information in a scenario that is of no relevance. Every bit of scenario information will have some significance. So when you look at a paragraph, always think about it from a perspective of question requirements. This information is useful. Where is it most useful? And that will help you to gain more ideas for your answer. In reading and planning, you also need to think about structuring your ideas, as in what are the key arguments examiner will want to see in my answer, how many marks will be available for each subcomponent of my answer to make sure your plan is sufficiently comprehensive and allows you to gain those available marks. Finally, in writing out your answer, do remember the format. For example, you could be asked for a report, so a simple to, from, date, subject gives you those report marks. You also might want to introduce headings. Even if the examiner is not explicitly asking for headings, they create nicer structure, nicer flow of ideas, and shows that your arguments are laid out in a logical order. It also helps you to make sure you've given due amount of attention to each argument you're making. In writing, make sure you use full sentences, because if you use full sentences, that will enable you to fully explain your points, but do stay concise. As a general rule, 1.5 lines of typed up text or 1.5 line of handwritten text should be enough to make that point. So keep it concise, avoid repetition, avoid unnecessary general statements, because all of them take up valuable time. Let's now think about the marks in the exam. There are misconceptions about what it takes to gain those marks, and those misconceptions, what I want to get clear straight away. So as a general rule, we could get 1 mark per point if our point contains a short reference to scenario fact. The point is explained why that argument is important, and of course, it must be related to question requirements. So for example, if organization in scenario is going through acquisition, you could reference that fact and explain why it's important, as an acquisition is a strategy to achieve growth. You could also relate it to question requirements and say that acquisition will help us to meet stakeholder expectations, shareholder expectations in particular, if the question is about shareholder needs and expectations. But it is also possible in most exams to gain 2 marks per point. And that means further development is necessary. Your point needs to be given further details. For example, you could provide those details by thinking about consequences of this particular move for the organization. As in, If we're going through acquisition that might have financial consequences for the company, we need to think about impact on financials, cash flow, if we're paying for the acquired company in cash. We also could think about significance of this point. In my example, we're thinking about acquisition as an avenue of growth. So why is it significant for us to grow quickly? That could reduce the degree of competition in the industry. It will give us scale necessary to withstand pressure from our competitors. So by giving extra value, by providing further arguments, you are able to extend your idea and therefore gain more marks. Finally, in preparation for your Wordy exam, it is essential to practice. And it's not just thinking that you know what the answer should be. It's actually about writing out those answers, because thinking about the answer is a very different skill from writing out the answer. So practicing mocks, practicing past exam papers is essential for success. It's also important to reflect on your answer and think about improvement. Have I made my points clear? Are my points fully explained? And I can hear you say that it's difficult to judge your own performance. I agree. So why not ask for help? For example, from your friend or even from your grandma. Give them your script and say, does this make sense? And if they say, yes, I can follow your ideas, those ideas are sensible, you're on the right track to pass this exam. Finally, it's also very important to learn from the examiner by looking at your answer in comparison to the model answer. We do know that many model answers are very extensive and contain many more ideas than would normally be produced by a student during the exam. However, you could summarize the model answer and go, those are the key points that the examiner would want me to talk about, and compare your answer with that summary, saying, have I made enough of those key points to gain the full marks? Finally, I want to thank you for attending this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. And maybe one day we're going to be able to meet together either in a virtual or physical classroom. I wish you lots of luck in your exam.